Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh,
Got my wires crossed. Sorry about that.
so did I. So I guess we're on the same page, just in a scattered way.
Are you muted?
Can you hear me? I'm not muted. Listen.
Okay, now I hear you.
Oh, good. Okay.
Maybe I had mute. I don't know.
I said it's funny because we both got our wires crossed, but it worked out. So we were scattered, but we were aligned in our scatteredness. So that's awesome.
Because I
had I had somebody from India in my last call, and they must have calculated the hour wrong because they started calling me right at 3. Mm-hmm. So I just assumed they were my next call. I didn't look at my schedule, and then after the call, I realized it was you, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. But Perfect. It worked out, so that's really cool.
So, how's it going for you?
Can't complain.
So I would ask if the shift is sudden or gradual, but you're probably going to say there is no shift.
Well, there's a shift. It's just occurring in a dream. Some people call it the shiftless shift because the only thing that shifts is our perspective on it. Nothing within the dream actually shifts other than the way we're looking at it. But yeah, I have a strong opinion about that one. It seems. So I'm very skeptical of anyone that ever says that they are experiencing awakening gradually, or that they are continuing their gradual awakening, because it's a life-changing shift in perspective. It's unmistakable, and it's dramatic is the wrong word, but there's such a stark contrast that people like me just can't shut up about what it's like before and after. So clearly something apparently happened. It just wasn't in time and space and didn't happen to somebody. So it's not like a dimmer switch from my perspective. It's like an on-off switch. So yeah, anyone that says they're undergoing a gradual awakening, I might correct them and say, well, you're undergoing a gradual ripening for a very direct and sudden realization.
How about oscillation?
Some people say some people say they got it and they lost it, but really the oscillation is just an expected, very common thing that's happening to the seeker as it's seeking. So it gets close to the truth, and then it gets too close to the truth, and it oscillates because we're being so direct and clear about this that it'll chase us down and want the answers, and then it'll want nothing to do with people like me. It'll go back and forth, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was an interesting thing because obviously one of the biggest anchors is the association with the body itself. And that was a fun one. Since I spoke with you, there's been a fair amount of, I guess you would call it neti. And it's like, if I touch a fire, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not doing it. The body pulls its hand out. Mm-hmm. And what can differentiate that with a thought arising? Like, where's the line drawn of that's me, that's not me, that's the body? That I'm not even talking about like where does the skin end and the like the self and other right there. That was a pretty clear moment, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's that simple stuff.
It's too simple. It's terrifyingly simple.
Well, it could be complex, no? If you decide to make it complex, you could dig in and start doing rituals and...
Yeah, that's the difference, right? So complicated means it's too complex to wrap our heads around. Complex just means we can understand it. So there's nothing wrong with complex. And yet this is very simple. It's almost too simple. It's so simple the mind can't find it.
Yeah.
And in a way, the mind doesn't even exist. So in a way, I would say it's not so much about disidentifying with the body as it is disidentifying with the mind and the stories mind tells. And the main delusion it tells is that you exist as a separate self, that there's someone in the body, rather than simply just being the embodied body. So I don't think the main issue is disidentification from the body. I think it's disidentification from the mind.
The body, that was being used as a tool to get to the mind. In other words,
Yeah.
thinking in the organic sense, the mind, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but so I'm going to think, I'm going to move my hand. I move my hand. Conventional thought, right? Because I'm in control. But then the body, you stick your hand in the fire, the hand comes out, is not any different than when getting cut off on the road and you're like, F you, and you raise your finger. And that's the mind doing. So I was using the body as a tool to, you have to pull out the foundation of a house for it to fall over.
Yeah, that's a good notice. That's a clear notice because, from the seeking mind's perspective, it identifies the entire human and all of its operations with personhood, and that's simply not the case. Personhood is a very tiny little speck within the greater humanity that you are as this one human body, for example. So even though it seems like that would be the problem, because wouldn't just being one separate human body be the sense of separation? Not really. Not really. Like the tree frog isn't having that problem, and it's a seemingly separate body. But it doesn't have this feeling of separate. So it's not really the body that gives the feeling of separate. It's what arises in the mind, and the mind is the sense of separation.
Yes.
So you wouldn't say that awareness is the mind. Just blank awareness has nothing to do with the mind. There's no thoughts there. So that's not the mind. And yet everything the mind says is bullshit. And for a very clever human to realize, oh, my thoughts are bullshit, it's not going to like that very much because it's used to being so clever. And it's the smartest person it's ever met. And so it's the smartest person in every room. So of course, if I'm the smartest person in every room I've ever, clearly I can figure this out. No, not with the mind. So yeah, it's not so much identifying with the body that's the problem, even because to be honest with you, after awakening, when I say the word Andrew, I'm talking about this body,
Yeah,
and not this mind. So I no longer I identify as only the body now. Surprise. And not only the mind.
I guess where I'm steering is in the facet of control, because we believe we control the body as the primary. That's going to be the first thing. You know what, though? I didn't choose to have the neck ache this morning. The body was presenting a neck ache.
Right.
That wasn't a decision, a choice, a volition, a cause and effect. It was what was happening.
And you also don't choose how you react to it, regardless of how it seems.
No, but then the mind said take an Advil, and I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. So the neocortex activity is so used to having that reinforcement reward of, see, I'm in control. I took the Advil. The body feels better. I'm so clever. Science is wonderful. And it's not wrong. It's just, that's just what the neocortex does. It's that mammalian part of the brain that makes us particularly human because we have such a thick neocortex, the outer part of the brain. And it's what gives us such a profound illusion of free will, illusion of self. Because human beings are self-aware, they're able to invent Advil and take it to cure the headache. But really, if an animal out in the woods had a headache, it would be in pain, but it wouldn't be suffering. And it also wouldn't be suffering from the delusion that it is someone. It would just be experiencing pain. Another way to put that is if you see a very happy three-legged dog, it's not suffering. They can walk just fine.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll suffer a little bit by beholding that, but more than anything, you'll be confused because it's not suffering at all. And yet, if you were missing a leg, you'd be down on yourself about it at least a little bit. It would mess with your head a little bit at least. And it shouldn't.
But we're always comparing. It's always, oh, this should be more like that. This should have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's perfect the way it is, always.
Yeah.
Every step of the way. And animals aren't suffering, and your own animal nature isn't suffering. And you're more so that. You're more so, a wild animal. You're more so the body. The body that has no rules. And yet you're not necessarily going to go around axe murdering people and eating them just because, you woke up and now you're beyond good and evil. You can do whatever you want. No, you're going to be doing the same things you were doing. You're going to be chopping wood and carrying water before and after because you're programmed to chop wood and carry water.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you've been doing it all. So whatever you've been doing, that's what you'll keep doing. There just won't be a doer anymore, but the doing will still happen. And yet certain things that you were doing purely for the psychological pomp of it all to feel better, especially if it's something you're really, really good at and you do it competitively, that might fall away entirely. You might never do it again.
Yes. So not I guess I might make sense. Things you do just because versus things that are, carry wood, chop water.
Like you're still going to get a glass of water when you're thirsty. You're still going to want ice in it if it's hot out. You're still going to eat food when you're hungry, but you're not going to be trying to prop up that fake sense of self to feel like it's enough, because on a certain level, you'll finally feel like you're enough. And on another level, you'll realize there's nothing in this world that can ever make anyone feel like they're fully enough, because we're still seemingly separate beings, if you will. In other words, if you realized you were everyone and everything, you wouldn't feel like you're missing out on anything. You feel like you're fully experiencing everything all at once, even if it's not your conscious lived experience. In the back of your mind, the guy that drives by in the Ferrari, you're enjoying that Ferrari as the guy driving that Ferrari, and you no longer have this, why don't I have one of those? Maybe a little bit, but you're not so messed up by it. It's more like the possibility of what you can experience instead of, why aren't I experiencing something good? So there's this total lack of suffering all of a sudden, and your whole life has been spent exerting seemingly 10 units of control over how you feel, and suddenly you feel okay. So suddenly everything feels effortless and everything gets done because it's no longer forced, and you're no longer, it's like the dualistic mind is programmed to try to swim upstream until you finally realize how absurd that is, and then the stream just takes you where you need to go. And we go where we're needed. Everything's perfect. Everything spontaneously happens in such a perfect way that it appears to us as this mind-blowing series of synchronicities, and yet that's always occurring behind nature. The mushrooms are controlling the plants, are controlling the animals. Like it seems like control to our mind, but really it's all just this grand, unified, functioning play of oneness that's orchestrating itself.
So years ago, I had maybe not a glimpse for a couple months, maybe not. And the carry water, chop wood, it was one of the most distinctive parts of it was everything became the journey, not the finish line. There is no finish line. And that was freedom.
Yeah, it's the way I explain it is it's kind of like playing a video game that you're not addicted to. So in other words, there's this game, you're like, oh yeah, we're gonna have this video game, and I could give a fuck about it or not. I could care less, but oh yeah, and I don't really care my progress in it. It's whatever, but I'm just gonna play it for a minute and enjoy the experience of playing it for a minute.
Yeah.
And your whole life can kind of take on that feel where it's not something you have to do, it's something you get to experience. So there's nothing you have to do to feel a certain way. There's nothing being put on you by the pressures of cultural conditioning and imagined abstract obligations, or rules, or instilled morality from whatever religion, which is ultimately utterly arbitrary, or I have to do this so that I'm a success or a failure, or all of that goes out the window, and you can suddenly just enjoy the fact that you're alive right now within a dream. You can enjoy the fact that it even seems like anything.
The richness of the experience.
Yeah, you can finally enjoy, and it's so different. It's so different. It's so easy and effortless and free. And it's just not the way it feels up until that's the way it feels. The exact opposite is the feeling up until that feeling. So it feel up until that freedom, that liberation, it feels like you are forced to play a role. It feels like you are forced down certain tracks and avenues, and it feels like there's things you have to do or not do to feel a certain way. If you do that, you're a good person. You do that, you're a bad person. And yet the thing that we call good and bad is so arbitrary that it's obviously arbitrary. You see someone else say, this is a good thing, and then you see someone else say, oh no, that's the worst thing. That should tell you everything you need to know. This is the highest virtue. No, not that. That's pure evil. From someone else's eyes, it's pure evil. Someone else is pure virtue. Well, that's why Socrates was awake and went around pestering people with questions like, oh, really? What is virtue?
Yep. Yeah, the Taoists in the Tao Te Ching have a lot to say about virtue. None of it good.
Yeah, basically the way the Tao Te Ching would put it is like, the guy that keeps telling you he's trustworthy shouldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
Or the way Alan Watts would put it, he would say, every system has a certain amount of irreducible rascality. In other words, every matrix has this neo urge to escape itself. Or another way to put that is, the way he would put it, he said, I don't trust anyone that doesn't have a hint of rascality. In other words, people that act like they're a perfect good person, those are the people whose basement the police should check first.
Yeah.
The perfectly normal family, those are the ones that probably have people down there in cages or something.
Yeah, Alan Watts he's just fun to listen to. That guy, yeah, he had some good stuff.
He was a rascal.
But you're hitting the nail on the head. That's because that's no one's true nature.
Right. Your true nature is a tiger, basically. A human being is some kind of like war ape that's also capable of Buddhic love at the same time. So we have this vast toolkit from which we can conjure up every story.
Yeah.
And it's very helpful to have access to the entirety of that toolkit. or the way I like to put it is, not only is the Dalai Lama capable of even now killing and eating you, he's capable of enjoying it. And that's the Dalai Lama. So again, it doesn't mean just because upon awakening morality is transcended utterly, it doesn't mean you're going to go around killing puppies left and right just because, oh, well, I don't have, now I can do whatever I want. It's like, no, you're still programmed to feel a certain way.
I didn't do it. I have no choice.
Yeah, the hands just started strangling people.
Yeah.
You know, and upon awakening, it's also, so there is an overlap between things like, you know, sociopathic mind, but there's also this profound, effortless, just loving everyone fully at all times, no matter what. And, you know, the sociopathic mind does not ever, even for a moment, have access to that. That's a higher brain functioning. So
everything I've looked at in terms of awakening almost perfectly mirrors mental illness. I'm totally serious. Totally serious.
No, yeah, I know what you mean, but there's no suffering from.
That's it. The way I've described it is, you don't have the resistance.
Yeah.
There's not the person resisting being.
Yeah.
You know, it can't really be put into words, the difference, but it's a night and day difference, even though the symptoms may be almost identical.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's definitely overlap, but I have a degree in psychology, and I almost became a neuroscientist and things. So I do see all these things that way, you know, and the way I don't know if you saw my interview with Nothing FM, but with Emerson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you know, I talk about a few of those, you know, like derealization, depersonalization, empathy, sociopath mind, but you know, multiple personality is a really interesting one. Because really what awakening is zero personality order. It's depersonalization order. You know, there's no disorder that someone is suffering from. So it's not classifiable even as a disorder, because it's, again, it shares many overlaps and sheds great clear insight on many of those disorders and why they seemingly exist. But it's very obviously sanity itself. So what awakening is sanity, finally.
Yes. Yeah, the so-called conditioned world is hypnotic insanity in a lot of respects.
Yeah. It's an enchantment, but it's an enchantment that causes suffering. And this is the disenchantment that ends the unnecessary suffering. I used to think in terms of, like, you know, nature never intended for humans to suffer this much. And that's true. We kind of did it to ourselves, you know, not that nature has intentions, but that's the way we anthropomorphize everything. Yeah, the primary delusion is that you exist. And if I qualify that at all, if I budge at all on that position, it's going to give the seeking mind the wrong idea. Because the seeking mind was, well, I exist, but it may be, okay, not as a separate person, but I exist as blah, 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 blah. But really, that's not going to be helpful. What's going to be helpful is to go, okay, do I exist? You know, so instead of asking, who am I? Ask, am I? It's probably helpful to ask, what am I? Instead of who am I? Because who implies that you're someone. You're not. What am I? Am I?
Yeah.
You know, I think the most helpful, clear message is one that skips right to the end.
I have to agree.
You know, imagine listening to a Pink Floyd song with a 3-hour intro. That's not what you want. You don't want the intro. You want to dig right in. Where's the actual song? That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah, Pink Floyd with their intros. There's quite a few songs you're like, is my stereo on? Because it takes about 30 seconds before you can even hear, like,
is it skipping?
Yeah, like
You don't want to beat around the bush forever.
Yeah.
Imagine going to a fancy restaurant where you're expecting a 7-course meal and you've been fasting for a week, and they just keep bringing out appetizer after appetizer of like the tiniest, fanciest nothing.
Yeah, that happened at a wedding.
Eventually be like, all right, like enough. Where is it? Where's the substance?
It was rough.
Yeah. So what tends to be potently helpful is oftentimes what's most uncomfortable to the mind. So the mind has this existential angst, and it likes to say things like, I'm tired. And what it really means by I'm tired is I'm tired of existing and suffering. And so then it might contemplate suicide or contemplate some dramatic shift in the way of its external conditioning and external conditions. But really, all it's really wanting is that sense of self to go away, because it inherently knows subconsciously that that's the problem and that's the cause of the suffering. It's just desperate to try something to have control, to immediately gratify. And yet this is something that doesn't happen in time. So it's something that when it happens, you can see how it's always been there. It was just not noticed somehow. And even that is almost shocking. Like, how is this not noticed until now? And yet to the seeking mind, it's like, well, how could this possibly be noticed?
But it's in a way the toughest thing. People would rather sit in meditation 10 hours a day for 20 years.
And then put a gun in their mouth and pull the trigger. They'd rather do that.
Because then they're doing something. At least it's something you work towards.
Right.
It's a goal.
Yeah, you need 40 years of preparation, and you don't actually need any of that. But that's what the mind tells itself, so that it can give itself an excuse to continue suffering for an additional 40 years.
Oh, no. It's 40 years. I think you have 32 more lifetimes after that. Kick the can down.
Yeah, it can wait till the next one. Oh, really? You get a next one? Interesting. So yeah, that's the main impetus, is to realize, like, if you're of the type that is wired for this, you probably have this sneaking suspicion that you're destined for it in this lifetime. And if you don't have that feeling, it's not going to happen.
I don't think that matters.
It doesn't. Words have an effect. It doesn't matter if words are true or not. They have an effect.
The character likes to believe there are good side effects of being on the journey, but it's all story.
And that's just to perpetuate the journey taking longer.
Yeah.
So the mind is basically what you're doing is you're going to kill the mind, and the mind knows it. You're going to kill identifying with the mind. And so the mind is not going to be so important anymore. And the mind wants to keep pretending to exist as you, so that suffering can continue, so that this all seems very real. It doesn't want the realness taken away. So it's going to make you suffer to maintain the realness of this dream. And that's how this dream is programmed.
It's protecting me from suffering, is what it says. It's like, oh.
And yet it's causing it. Yeah.
Exactly. Like,
isn't that funny?
You got to do this because tomorrow it's going to pay off. It's going to be a big payoff. Tomorrow, big day.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that funny? It's once you realize that it's all totally upside down, you can almost do like what you would do with the stock market. If you get a hot tip, do the opposite, because they're trying to control you. It's kind of like that. Think of it like the big banksters that control the stock market. If they tell you to put your money in gold, that's the one thing you shouldn't put your money in, type of deal. Think of the mind that way. It's trying to screw you the same way. It's trying to control it's trying to maintain the delusion of what it thinks it has. In other words, the only thing that gets taken away from you is everything, but that's all delusions that are being taken away. So the mind actually wants to cling to all these delusions that create suffering, to create this sense of realness so that it can convince itself that it's real. And yet at no point is it real. At no point is it actually alive. And yet it tells you to fear death. So the body is alive, but this delusion, this bug in the programming, this conditioned mind, the dualistic seeking conceptual mind, it can only exist as a delusion. So the last thing it wants is for all your delusions to suddenly evaporate. And also, it has an evolutionary purpose. It'll help the body survive a little longer. And yet that might not even be true, because things like suicide are far more common from the seeking perspective. So as far as evolution is concerned, it's kind of a paradox, because on the one hand, it would seem like the awakened state has no evolutionary function, and yet it's also saved lives by its non-reactivity. It's very interesting, very strange, very paradoxical.
The awakened state could be more associated, if you want to go neuro, with right brain intuitive.
Yeah.
And what is it like? You know, process 7 things left brain and like a billion things right brain. You know, it's
Yeah, the dominance shifts.
so
Yeah, the dominance
would,
goes from reason and logic to directly intuited, like a wild animal,
yes.
and
So
sensed instinctually. Yeah.
the left brain's going to say take that path because it looks better. The right brain's going to say that path is the one to take, and the path that looks better has a rock slide and you get crushed.
Yeah, so it's the logical mind that wants free will to exist, for example, because then it has control. Everything's orderly, everything's linear within time and space. It can all be understood and directed and controlled and manipulated and studied and analyzed and perfected and as where the non-conceptual mind experiences the liberation of there being no free will and no control and nothing to plan and not needing to know what happens next. And it's funny too, because people that do meditate can actually deepen their meditative state by shifting over to the other side of that. So shifting into the intuitive mind instead of the logical mind. That's how. That's one of the biggest secrets to deepening meditation in a way to actually have breakthroughs. But yeah, as far as the awakened perspective is considered, it is like that. It's not that one goes away. It's just that the dominance shifts from the logical to the non-dual animal intuition side.
To which I would say that is the greater survival skill.
Yeah, because you know
what plants to eat and what one not to eat.
that too, but it's like everything's built in. Like, for example, a chimpanzee has the programming within its amygdala to be afraid of snakes, spiders, and toadstools. Human beings are also afraid of snakes, spiders, but maybe not toadstools. So there's this kind of experimental quality of the human being that it's how to put this. The more intelligent a human is, the more likely it is to do something risky and new. And so human beings are inherently danger seeking because of how self-aware and intelligent they are. And they're not actually afraid of death when they're in the natural state. It's just when we are in the dualistic mind mode that existential angst, the fear of future loss, things like that dictate reality. So you have people that already are worth $10 billion still getting up, putting 14-hour days in to go make money. Makes no sense. It's a mental illness. If you have that much money, you should probably retire to some country where, you know, your dollar goes 20 times further than it would, and, you know, that type of, that's the logical, obvious, you know, thing you would do if you finally had $10 billion, is you'd never work a day in your life after that, unless it was something you were really passionate about, not because it made money. But you have these people that are worth 10 billion desperately still trying to make a buck, and that's just obviously mental illness.
Yeah.
But the entirety of the dualistic mind can be seen as a very strange type of mental illness, simply by being human. There's a craziness to it, and we're more prone to craziness. And again, awakening is kind of viewed as sanity. That's why it's so clear and simple, because it's sane. That's why it can't be heard, because 99.99% of people are insane, and they all agree that that's real. They all share the delusion of this separate sense of self, and of reason being the king. And it's funny too, in the West, you know, illumination, enlightenment, by light they mean reason. So they're calling, so the Western word enlightenment is the light of reason. But even that is not quite right. Because again, that's the ego mind trying to perfect itself. And when I see somebody trying to perfect the separate self, it's kind of like you're playing a video game and taking it too seriously. It's like, well, I gotta get everything just. It's like, okay, but none of that's real. Just so you remember that. Like, feel free to have fun and experience the digital sunset in the game, but don't. If you're trying to perfect the character, I mean, I'm a little worried because it's not real. And yeah. Or if you see someone doing shadow work, the way I usually explain that, well, first I'll say something like, we are shadow creatures within an ocean of clear light. You know, all we are is the shadow. And yet, if you see someone doing shadow work, it's basically like equally as crazy as like somebody seeing their shadow and taking a hammer trying to destroy it. It's like, that's not real, you know. Or if you see somebody trying to fix their broken self, there is no broken self. There's no self. There is no brokenness.
But it's so much easier because you're doing something.
Yeah.
It's tangible, even if it's intangible.
Yeah, the ego wants to shoot lightning out of its fingertips.
Yeah. And I hear there's a guy in China that does that. So if you work hard enough,
Yeah, but he's on retreat for the next 2 years in a forest, so he's not able to be contacted at the moment. That's the thing, right? Like something like Shaktipat, transmitting Kundalini Shakti energy from one body to another. I don't know if that's inherently helpful or not. Like, even if I had the ability to do that right now, I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing, because, you know, you could give somebody a glimpse, and then that glimpse is just a glimpse, and then that can increase frustration or decrease. It all depends. We don't know. So is it helpful? It depends. Maybe if someone's never had a glimpse, it might be helpful to have a glimpse, but to keep repeatedly only having glimpses could be pretty frustrating, I imagine.
and then you need to fix.
Yeah, then you need to keep doing that, and because of the impermanence of it.
Just one more glimpse and I'll be there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The real goal is this permanent shift in perspective that will at least allow you to enjoy the remainder of your lifetime.
Guaranteed. Yeah, Alan Watts, one of his books is called The Wisdom of Insecurity. Something to be said for that.
Yeah. It's like, on the one hand, existence is inherently unsatisfactory, and so awakening is somehow satisfactory because it's, non-existence in a way to the seeking mind, the dualistic separate mind. It is seen directly to not exist. So this absence is very liberating. And on the other hand, even after awakening, there's some aspect of, just seemingly being a mortal and being a body, and just something as simple as the fact that you're going to get thirsty again eventually, you're going to get hungry again eventually, you're going to get cold and hot eventually, etc.
Mm-hmm.
There's this inherent hamster wheel, and yet that doesn't bother so much, because really it's the so awakening does satisfy, but it's not something in the world or of the world or in time and space or some external condition we can all compete for, or it's very different. And it's something that's always here, it's always on, it's always like, it's crazy how subtle it seems from the seeking perspective. Again, you could have an IQ of 4,000 and miss it, type of deal. It's strange that's even possible, So if that's the case, and it almost has nothing to do with intelligence, other than the fact that intelligence, if it's in abundance, is probably correlated with more suffering. In other words, the smartest people you've ever met in your life, a lot of them were probably very angry and upset about reality itself, and were probably even upset that they even seem to exist. And if you ever had a friend who is in the spectrum of being mentally retarded, you might notice they have this shining smile that you can't mimic, that you wish you had. And again, it's the more intelligent the mind is, the more it suffers, the more it identifies with the mind. It's not necessarily what it's cracked up to be. Everybody thinks they want to be intelligent until you realize that it's kind of the other way around on a certain level.
Well, that was this short story. I read it in like maybe middle school. Flowers for Algernon. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it. Great, great short story. It's they have a mouse, Algernon, and he's mentally retarded. He can't get his way through the maze. I'm going to give away the whole story. I don't care. And they have an experimental medication and give it to him. And the story's told from the journal of the guy who they recruit, who's like, I don't know, he's sweeping floors, whatever, and he's also of low intelligence, but happy. So the mouse is kicking the crap out of the maze. He's the smartest mouse in the world. This guy takes it. His writing becomes amazing, blah, blah, blah. So what happens? Then the drug starts to stop working and you see the mouse deteriorating and backsliding. And so now this guy is frantically clawing, trying to maintain and then he's dead ass miserable, going back to being where he was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, there's really no cause and effect. So there's just a lot of correlations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but yeah, intelligence, real intelligence, is really just a type of adaptability and just kind of the raw processing power of the organism's central nervous system.
But we've been conditioned to believe it's the ability to regurgitate facts.
Yeah, but it's actually has nothing to do with conceptual anything.
No.
And it's hard for the mind to see that. It's hard for the mind to see how that's even possible. And yet, I think one of the clearest ways to witness the awakened state is just to watch animals. Animals seem like you can almost exploit, like if you have a cat and a laser, you can almost guarantee utter control over its every movement because it's spontaneously reacting to input and stimuli. But we're the same way, which is hard to see. It's more subtle. But we're exactly the same way. And it's not like we might not, it's weird. But everything's just happening. Everything's just spontaneously happening. But we project this sense of self into everything, you know. We see a man in the moon. We assume there's somebody up there throwing lightning bolts. Because we can only think in terms of doership and agency and choice. Well, he must have pissed somebody off up there that looks a lot like us, but they're bigger and stronger and smarter and more able to do and choose and think.
Yeah, the cause and effect thing is fascinating. In a dream, it seems like everything is cause and effect, but then looking back, it's like, well, it was in a dream. I didn't have to bounce off the wall when I ran into it. I could have gone right through it. But there was the apparent effect and the apparent cause.
Yeah, you can tell that the whole structure and plot of the dream is already established.
Yeah.
That's how I used to put it when I was a seeker. I would say I was trying to prove the higher self to people, but I would say, if you're in the dream, then who the hell's creating the dream as you go? You're in the dream and don't know what happens next. Who the hell knows what happens next and is creating the dream? But again, that's just projecting the sense of self as if there has to be someone in the happening, because that protects its own sense of separate self as a persistent delusion. And then that allows the suffering to continue, which then allows realness. I was going to say realization, like derealization and real. It's kind of funny. There's a paradox there too, how words are invented. Realization meaning to make it real, and yet actual realization is realizing that this isn't quite real. It's neither real nor unreal.
Language is funny. All the like
It's hilarious.
everything's hidden in plain sight.
Again, my favorite Tony Parsons quote is, "The nothing is hiding in plain sight as everything."
Yeah.
So there's only a oneness. Even nothing isn't a thing, and even everything is simply a thing. So, it's so hard to talk about. It's so hard to really nail it down in words because it can't be.
The Tao which can be named is not the eternal Tao.
Yeah. And then it goes on to say, as named, it's ba 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 ba. As unnamed, it's ba 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 ba. I always thought it was funny though, because Lao Tzu is Chinese for old man or old master. So it's like a pseudonym. It's written anonymously, not by a person.
It's a pretty good book.
Yeah. One of the best.
One of the best. At least they kept it short.
Yeah, all the best books keep it short. Ramana, Tony Parsons, the Tao Te Ching, they're all short books.
Mm-hmm. Guangzi is one of the, I think that's a great compliment to Tao Te Ching. He does it more in parable with the lovely stories. But same thing, keeps it pretty short. Just,
yeah.
But none of it, that's the problem. It's like, I'm sure you've been there, done that. I have a book accumulation going on.
Yeah, I worked in a library. I'm in one right now.
Yeah.
I'm just not reading any books.
Well, that's the problem. Is you get into the reading, and the reading is the doing of the reading. Then some people find when they're reading, I'm like, yeah, more words.
Well, the thing that I realized is like, it's startling and you can suddenly shift into this mode, but it's kind of startling to just, wherever you are any given moment, just look around the room and find things that have writing on them. And you just be surprised. Everything's covered in writing. Like everywhere you go, everything's covered in writing. Everywhere you go, everything is covered in writing. What a strange human thing. And I think that type of thing's, a little more obvious if you're on like a psychedelic or something, but you can also just realize it spontaneously, like, how strange is this? There's words all over everything. How bizarre. What a weird thing humans do. Every little thing is covered in words. Everywhere. Every chance they get, everything's covered in words.
Yeah.
Oh, there's an empty spot on the wall. Oh, well, let's hang this thing that has some clever words on it.
Life is like a Dr. Bronner's bottle.
Yeah, the mind is like a Snapple lid, tells you a bunch of facts, but who knows if they're true or not.
Yeah.
But I do have to get going. I just realized I'm on the hour now. I think I have another call lined up. So it's always a pleasure talking to you, man.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure. We'll have to do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks so much.